The air inside the massive training facility was thick, heavy, and smelled unmistakably of hard work. It was that specific mix of old sweat, leather, and the cooling menthol of muscle rub that clings to the walls of any serious dojo. Outside, the city of New York was going about its noisy business, but inside these walls, the only sounds were the sharp thwack of pads being struck and the rhythmic heavy breathing of people pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. The lights were bright, almost too bright, glaring down on the blue mats where the cast and crew of the latest action blockbuster were drilling fight sequences for the 10th hour of the day. Leaning against a metal support beam near the back of the room stood Daniel. He wasn't there to hold pads or adjust lighting. He was a technician, a high-level consultant brought in to ensure that the fighting on screen looked brutal but remained technically precise. Daniel was a lifelong martial artist, a man who had spent decades earning his black belts the hard way through bloody sparring sessions, broken bones, and the humility of tapping out when a chokehold was sunk in too deep. To him, martial arts wasn't a performance, it was a survival skill and a way of life. Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched the main star of the film, Keanu Reeves, center of the room. The actor was covered in sweat. His black t-shirt was soaked through, clinging to his skin, and his hair was matted to his forehead. He looked exhausted. Around him, the stunt team, actual professional fighters and gymnasts, were also dripping with sweat, running through a complex choreography involving knives, hand-to-hand combat, and grappling. From a distance, it looked impressive. The movements were crisp. The sound effects added in post-production would make the impacts sound like gunshots. But Daniel was a purist. He was watching the mechanics, not the movie magic. And what he saw made his jaw tighten. He saw telegraphing little movements where an actor pulls a hand back before punching, signaling to the opponent what is coming. He saw moments where balance was off, relying on the strength of the other stuntman to hold the actor up rather than the actor holding his own ground. To Daniel, this wasn't fighting, it was dancing. It was a violent, beautiful dance, but it lacked the raw, chaotic energy of a real confrontation. He had seen this 100 times before. Hollywood producers would bring in a star, put them through a boot camp for 3 months, and expect them to become masters of combat. Daniel knew better. He knew that 3 months couldn't compete with 30 years of grappling in rough gyms where there were no scripts and no referees to stop the pain. As the afternoon wore on, the fatigue in the room became visible. The director called for a break, and the crew immediately sprang into action, offering water bottles and towels to the talent. Keanu Reeves walked over to the edge of the mat, wiping his face with a small towel. He accepted a bottle of water from an assistant, nodded his thanks, and took a long drink. He didn't complain. He didn't sit in a fancy chair and demand a foot rub like the stories Daniel had heard about other prima donnas in the industry. Instead, Keanu just stood there, reviewing the footage of the last take on a monitor, pointing out something he wanted to fix about his own posture. Daniel watched this quietly. A small part of him respected the work ethic. It was obvious Keanu was trying. He was putting in the hours. But in Daniel's mind, trying wasn't enough. You can try to swim across the ocean, but if you don't know how to handle the currents, you're going to drown. Daniel felt a familiar itch in his fingertips, a mix of skepticism and a desire to see the truth. He looked at the stunt coordinator, a friend of his, and then back at Keanu. The story on the internet was that Keanu Reeves was a lethal weapon, a master of judo and jiu-jitsu who could handle himself in any street fight. The memes called him the One-Punch King or the immortal Baba Yaga. But Daniel knew how the internet worked. It built people up into gods just to tear them down later. He wondered how much of it was real skill and how much was just good marketing. He remembered a few years back, working on a different set with a different famous action star. That guy had talked a big game, acted tough behind the scenes, but when Daniel had gently pushed him during a rehearsal, the actor had crumbled. He had panicked. The tough guy image vanished instantly when faced with actual resistance. Since then, Daniel carried a certain amount of professional disdain for actors who played fighters. He felt they cheapened the art. They made it look easy, which was dangerous because it gave regular people a false sense of confidence. Daniel pushed himself off the wall and walked slowly around the perimeter of the room. He tightened the Velcro straps on his own wrist braces. He wasn't wearing a GI, just simple athletic gear, but he moved with a quiet, predatory grace that turned heads among the crew who knew who he was. He was assessing the environment. The mats were standard competition grade, good grip. The lighting was fine. It was a controlled environment, safe enough. As he walked, his thoughts kept circling back to the challenge. He didn't want to hurt the guy, that wasn't the point. Keanu was essential to the movie, worth millions of dollars. Daniel wasn't stupid. But he wanted to break the script. He wanted to see what would happen if the choreography stopped for just 10 seconds. He wanted to see if the legend could actually feel pressure. Real pressure. Not the pressure of a camera lens, but the pressure of another man trying to control his body against his will. He watched Keanu laughing at something a cameraman said. The actor seemed humble, quiet, he didn't carry himself with the arrogance of a typical tough guy. This intrigued Daniel. Usually, the ones who talk the loudest are the ones who have the least to show. Keanu was the opposite. He was almost invisible when he wasn't in character. But Daniel knew that on the mat, humility often hides the deepest confidence. Or, it hides absolute terror. The break was coming to an end. The director clapped his hands. All right, everyone, places. We're going to run sequence 4 again. Let's pick up the energy. The stunt team groaned good-naturedly and shook out their limbs. Keanu tossed his water bottle into a bin and stepped back onto the blue mats. He took a deep breath, his face changing instantly. The tiredness vanished. His eyes sharpened. He became the character he was playing, a focused, dangerous weapon. He started shadowboxing, throwing jabs and crosses, his movements snapping with surprising speed. Daniel stood at the edge, just outside the boundary of the lights. He felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment. He could just go back to leaning against the wall, collect his paycheck, and go home. He could let the illusion live. But the itch was too strong. The black belt in him demanded respect for the craft, and he couldn't respect a performance if he didn't know the reality behind it. He decided that as soon as this take was done, he would make his move. He wouldn't do it in front of the director or the whole crew. He would wait for the natural lull, the moment when the actors were catching their breath. He would approach Keanu as a peer, or perhaps as a skeptic, and offer a simple proposition. A role. A spar. Just to see. The scene began. The stunt actors rushed Keanu. The chaos erupted. Punches were thrown, blocks were made. Keanu executed a perfect throw, using the stuntman's momentum to flip him onto the mat. It looked fantastic. It looked painful. But Daniel saw the stuntman tuck his chin and roll safely at the last second. He saw the cooperation in the violence. Cut. The director yelled. That was great. Let's reset for the wide shot. The tension in the room dropped instantly. People started moving equipment, adjusting the lights for the next angle. Keanu stayed in the center of the mat, though. He didn't leave. He called one of the stunt fighters over, a big guy who specialized in grappling, and asked him to walk through a specific counter move slowly. Keanu wanted to understand the leverage. This piqued Daniel's interest. The actor wasn't just memorizing steps, he was asking questions about the physics of the move. He was asking, "Where does my weight need to be to stop him from sweeping me?" Daniel nodded his head slightly. Okay, the guy was smart. He was asking the right questions. But asking the right questions and having the right answers are two very different things. You can study a map of a mountain for years, but that doesn't mean you can climb it without slipping. Daniel looked around. The crew was busy. The stunt coordinator was talking to the director about the next shot. No one was paying attention to the two figures on the far side of the mat. It was now or never. Daniel straightened his back. He smoothed out his shirt. He felt that familiar calm settle over him, the calm that comes before a collision. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was just the necessity of testing the truth. He began to walk toward the center of the mat. His footsteps were soft on the foam, but he moved with purpose. He saw Keanu look up, sensing the approach. Their eyes met from across the room. Keanu didn't look away. He didn't look nervous. He just waited. Daniel thought about what he was going to say. He couldn't be rude. That would get him thrown off the set instantly. He had to be charming. He had to make it sound like a friendly idea. "Hey, great work today. You want to try that live?" It sounded innocent enough. But Daniel knew what he intended to do. He intended to turn up the heat. He intended to apply a squeeze, a pressure, that Keanu had likely never felt in his life. He wanted to see the panic. He wanted to validate his own skepticism. He was only a few feet away now. Keanu stopped talking to the stuntman and turned his full attention to the approaching instructor. Keanu's chest was heaving slightly from the exertion, his face flushed, but his eyes were clear. "Daniel, right?" Keanu asked, extending a hand. He recognized him from the earlier meetings. Daniel took the hand. The grip was firm, calloused, but not crushing. "That's right. Keanu. You guys are moving fast today," Keanu said, wiping sweat from his eyes. "The lighting changed, taking a while." "A few minutes," Daniel said. He took a breath, deciding to dive right in. "You've got good flow out there. The choreography is tight." "Thanks. We're trying to get the speed up without losing the safety," Keanu replied, always professional. Daniel nodded, looking around to make sure no one important was listening. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough so it felt private. "That's the movie business, though. Safety first. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of that would work if the other guy wasn't trying to catch your fall?" Keanu paused. He looked at Daniel, his expression shifting slightly. He sensed where this was going. Actors get challenged all the time. Usually by guys in bars who want to prove they can beat up the guy from the movies. But this was different. This was a professional, in a gym, speaking quietly. Keanu didn't get defensive. He just tilted his head, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Daniel smiled a tight, confident smile. "I've been watching you. You move well. Better than most. But I can see the rehearsal in your steps. You're expecting the punches to go where they're supposed to go." "Because they're supposed to go there," Keanu said with a hint of a smile. That's the job. Sure, Daniel agreed. But what happens if they don't? What happens if, say, right now, I don't follow the script? The air between them seemed to stop moving. The noise of the crew faded into the background for a second. This was the line in the sand. Daniel was no longer just a consultant, he was a challenger. He was putting his reputation and his ego on the line, but in his mind, he was the one holding the cards. He had the years of experience. He had the reality. Keanu looked Daniel up and down, assessing him. He saw the black belt status in the man's stance. He saw the confidence. Most people might have laughed it off or made a joke to diffuse the tension. Keanu didn't. He simply looked at Daniel, and for the first time, the actor mask slipped away completely. There was just a man standing on a mat. So, Daniel said, taking a small step back and opening his hands. While they set up the lights, want to see how deep the rabbit hole really goes? Just a friendly roll. No cameras. Just you and me. It wasn't a polite suggestion anymore. It was a test. And Daniel was waiting, with absolute certainty, to see what would happen when the star stepped out of the script and into the fire. The silence that stretched between them wasn't awkward or hostile, it was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Keanu stood there, still breathing slightly hard from the last take, his hands resting loosely on his hips. He looked at Daniel, really looked at him, perhaps trying to figure out if this was a joke or if the man standing in front of him was serious. The crew was bustling around them, moving heavy light stands and arranging cables, but in that small circle on the mat, it felt like they were the only two people in the room. Keanu didn't get defensive. He didn't puff out his chest or laugh it off like someone trying to save face. Instead, a small, genuine smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the smile of someone who was always up for a challenge, someone who had spent years turning no into let's see. He nodded slowly, almost to himself, as if he had made a decision in that split second. Yeah, Keanu said simply. He wiped his hands on his pants. Okay. Let's go. Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline spike in his chest. He had expected the actor to maybe make an excuse about being tired or not wanting to get injured before a big scene. That was the standard Hollywood response. I can't risk my face, or insurance won't cover it. But Keanu just agreed. Just like that. Daniel nodded toward the gear bags stacked against the far wall. Grab some gloves. We'll keep it standing. Just light sparring. See how you react. Sounds good, Keanu said. They walked over to the equipment area. The contrast between the two men was interesting. Daniel moved with the rigid, deliberate posture of a career fighter, shoulders forward, eyes scanning, every movement economical. Keanu, on the other hand, walked with a loose, relaxed gait. He looked tired, his movements slower, but there was a certain gravity to him, a calmness that never seemed to leave him. As they dug through the bin for sparring gloves and shin guards, a few of the stunt performers noticed what was happening. The noise of the room seemed to dip a few decibels. You didn't have to be a genius to figure out what was going on. Daniel was known as the reality check guy on set. He was the technician who cared about the how and why of a fight. Seeing him gear up with the lead actor was enough to make anyone stop and watch. They gathered near the craft services table, pretending to drink coffee or adjust their equipment, but their eyes were locked on the mat. Daniel pulled on his gloves, tightening the Velcro straps with a loud rip. He made sure they were snug. He handed a pair to Keanu. So, how do we want to do this? Keanu asked, pulling the gloves onto his hands. He flexed his fingers a few times, getting a feel for the fit. Tap out points. Let S just flow, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice casual. I'll apply some pressure. You react. If you feel like you're in trouble, tap or step out. No ego. Just learning. Perfect, Keanu replied. He looked at Daniel, his face open and focused. I appreciate it. Sometimes you get stuck in the choreography and you forget what it feels like to actually resist. Daniel smirked internally. That's exactly what I'm talking about, he thought. But on the outside, he kept his expression neutral. He wanted to teach the actor a lesson, but he didn't want to be a bully. He wanted to show him the difference between dancing and fighting. They walked back to the open area of the mat. A stagehand called out, "Heads up, guys. We need 5 minutes to reset the big rig." This was their window. They had a small, private arena in the middle of a busy movie set. As they stepped onto the blue mats, the texture under their feet shifted. The rubberized surface gave them traction. Daniel stood a few feet away from Keanu and raised his gloves, tapping them together. The dull thud echoed slightly. You ready? Daniel asked. Keanu raised his own gloves, settling into a stance that looked very similar to the one he used in the movies. His lead hand was slightly lower than a traditional boxer's guard, his weight distributed evenly between both legs. He didn't look stiff, he looked fluid. Ready, Keanu said. They began to circle each other. The motion was slow at first. This was the feeling out process, the ancient ritual of combat where two humans measure distance and reaction time. Daniel kept his eyes locked on Keanu's chest, using his peripheral vision to watch the actor's feet and shoulders. He was looking for that telegraph again, that little movement that warns a punch is coming. At first, Daniel kept things simple. He flicked out a jab, not to hurt, but to see how Keanu would handle it. He expected Keanu to block it with a high, stiff arm, like a beginner does. Instead, Keanu just tilted his head to the side an inch. The glove missed his face by a whisker, and at the same time, Keanu's hand came up to parry Daniel's wrist away. It was subtle. It was efficient. Daniel nodded. Okay, defense is good. He stepped in again, this time throwing a slow combination, a left jab followed by a right cross. He pulled the power, wanting to give Keanu a chance to work the counter moves he had been practicing for the cameras. Keanu slipped the jab and caught the cross on his forearm, immediately stepping backward to escape the pocket. It was exactly what the script called for. It was beautiful to watch, technically perfect for the scene. But it wasn't real fighting. Daniel stopped circling for a second. He dropped his hand slightly and looked at Keanu. That's great, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet mat. But that's the third time you've stepped back. In the movies, the camera loves that. It gives you space. But in real life, in a real fight, if you give a guy that much space, he's just going to chase you down until he corners you. Keanu paused, blinking a few times as he processed the critique. He lowered his glove slightly. So, don't retreat. Counter, Daniel corrected. Don't go away. Go in. You have to take the pain to give the pain. You can't be afraid to get hit. The look on Keanu's face changed. It wasn't a look of fear, it was a look of intense curiosity. He was like a sponge, wanting to absorb the correction. He nodded, digesting the information. He understood the theory, but theory and practice are two different beasts. All right, Keanu said. Let's try again. Daniel reset his stance. This time, the skepticism in his mind began to fade into a more professional focus. He realized that Keanu wasn't acting humble, he actually was humble. He actually wanted to learn. That made the challenge more interesting. It wasn't about exposing a fraud anymore, it was about stress testing a student who was incredibly advanced in movie fu but perhaps green in the raw reality of sparring. I'm going to pick up the speed a little, Daniel warned him. Just stay calm. Keanu nodded. I'm ready. Daniel launched forward. This time, he didn't pull his punches as much. He didn't try to hurt the man. Keanu was too valuable to the production for that, but he applied enough pressure so that the hits would sting if they landed. He threw a rapid-fire jab, cross, hook combination. Keanu's hands came up in a tight shell, blocking the shot solidly. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of gloves hitting gloves was satisfying. But Daniel wasn't done. As Keanu blocked, Daniel stepped in with a clinch, a move where you grab the opponent's neck or shoulders to control them. In choreography, this is where the actors would stop, reset, or throw a pre-planned knee. But Daniel didn't stop. He grabbed Keanu by the shoulders and used his weight to drive him backward. He wanted to see if Keanu could maintain his balance when someone was actively trying to smother him. Keanu stumbled back a step, his heels scuffing the mat, but he didn't fall. He instinctively tried to push Daniel away to create distance, just like he had been taught to do for the camera. No. Daniel barked, breaking the clinch and stepping back. Don't push me away. That just gives me room to hit you again. Pull me in. Make me heavy. Keanu straightened up, breathing a little harder now. He looked at his hands, then back at Daniel. Pull you in, he muttered to himself. It was a small adjustment, but it required completely rewiring his instincts. His instinct was self-preservation, get away. Daniel was asking him to do the opposite, get closer to danger to control it. The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. The crew members weren't pretending to work anymore. Everyone was watching. The stunt coordinator, a grizzled veteran of the industry, stood with his arms crossed, a smirk on his face. He knew what Daniel was doing. He knew that Daniel was dismantling the movie layer of Keanu's fighting style, piece by piece, trying to see if there was a fighter underneath. Daniel looked at Keanu's eyes. He didn't see panic. He saw calculation. Most people, when you correct them and then pressure them immediately, get flustered. They get mad or they shut down. Keanu was just thinking. He was recalculating. One more time, Keanu said. He shook his arms out, rolling his neck to loosen the tension. Let's do it. Daniel felt a fresh wave of respect for the actor. It would have been easy for Keanu to say, "Okay, good session," and walk back to the safety of the script. He was the star, he could have called it off whenever he wanted. But he stayed. He stood in the pocket. "Okay," Daniel said. "Don't think. Just react." They squared up again. The air felt charged now. The playful vibe of the offer was gone. This was a test. Daniel began to circle again. He feinted a left jab to the face, watching Keanu's eyes flicker toward the glove. Then, he snapped a low kick to the outside of Keanu's thigh. It was a smart move. Actors trained to protect their faces and their chests, they often forget about their legs. The kick connected with a dull thwack. It wasn't full power, but it was solid. Keanu's leg absorbed the blow, but his stance wobbled just a fraction. Daniel saw the wobble. He saw the opening. He immediately followed up with the right hand, expecting Keanu to be off balance and easy to hit. But to Daniel's surprise, Keanu didn't try to recover his balance by stepping back. Instead, remembering Daniel's advice, he leaned into the discomfort. He took a step forward, directly into Daniel's space, and threw a sharp elbow strike, strictly a move for the camera, but executed with surprising timing. It was a clash of worlds. Daniel's martial art reality meeting Keanu's choreography. Daniel caught the elbow on his forearm and used the momentum to spin Keanu around. They separated, both breathing a bit heavier now. Better, Daniel admitted, nodding his head. But that elbow, if I was really trying to hurt you, I would have ducked under it and taken you down before you even extended your arm. Keanu let out a short breath, half laugh, half grunt. He wiped the sweat from his eyes with the back of his glove. Okay. So, what do I do? Daniel looked at him. The skepticism was gone now, replaced by the focus of a teacher who sees a student with potential. Daniel realized that he wasn't dealing with a pretender. He was dealing with someone who had been trained one way: beautiful, visual, safe, and was now being asked to step into the dark, chaotic, messy world of real fighting. And the most incredible part was that Keanu wasn't backing down. Forget what you know for a second, Daniel said, stepping closer, his voice dropping so only Keanu could hear. The next time I come at you, don't block. Don't run. You have to invite me in. You have to let me think I have you, and then change the game. Keanu looked into Daniel's eyes, searching for the truth in his words. He took a deep breath, centering himself. The noise of the movie set, the lights, the crew, the pressure of the millions of dollars, it all seemed to fall away. It was just two men on a mat. Invite you in, Keanu repeated. He nodded, lowering his stance, making himself smaller, more compact. All right. I'm ready. Daniel adjusted his mouth guard. He decided it was time to stop holding back so much. He needed to escalate. He needed to throw something that Keanu couldn't choreograph his way out of. He needed to see the panic, or at least, the struggle. He wanted to see the one move that defined Keanu's ability to adapt. Here it comes, Daniel warned. He didn't jab this time. He didn't fake. He committed. He fired a straight, hard punch toward Keanu's chest, planning to follow it with a grab that would end the spar in a takedown. It was a classic, aggressive attack. It was the moment of truth. Daniel's eyes locked onto Keanu's center, watching, waiting for the actor to make the mistake that amateurs always make. But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He stood his ground, and as Daniel's glove closed the distance, he saw something shift in Keanu's posture. It was subtle, almost invisible, like the tide turning before a wave crashes. The actor was gone. The martial artist was waking up. The moment hung in the air, suspended like the dust motes dancing in the bright studio lights. Daniel's forward momentum had been checked, not by a block, but by a subtle shift in Keanu's weight. It was a small thing, just a few inches of movement, but to a martial artist, it was everything. It meant the man in front of him wasn't just reacting to visual cues, he was feeling the fight. He was using his intuition. Daniel pulled his hand back, resetting his guard. He took a deep breath, tasting the sweat and the effort in the air. He looked at Keanu, searching for a sign of fatigue or fear, but found none. Keanu was just standing there, arms loose, breathing rhythmically. His eyes were focused, not on Daniel's face, but on his chest, the center of mass. It was a classic fighting gaze, the kind that takes years to develop. Daniel felt a flicker of genuine surprise ripple through him. Okay, he thought. He's not just a memorizer. He's actually paying attention. But surprise wasn't enough to stop the test. Daniel had come here to prove a point, and his ego was now fully invested in the outcome. If he went easy now, if he let the actor survive just to be polite, then his whole philosophy about real fighting versus movie fighting would feel hollow. He needed to break the rhythm. He needed to show Keanu that choreography is a brittle shell that shatters when you hit it with a hammer. Good, Daniel said, nodding slowly, loud enough for Keanu to hear. You're feeling it better now. But feeling isn't enough. You have to control it. Daniel began to circle again, his feet making soft shuffling sounds on the blue mat. He changed his rhythm this time. Instead of the steady, predictable pace of a drilling partner, he started to stutter step, moving fast, then slowing down, then twitching his shoulders. It was a psychological tactic designed to make the opponent blink, to make them guess when the attack is coming. The crew watching from the edges grew quieter. They sensed the change in energy. Daniel wasn't just coaching anymore, he was hunting. Suddenly, Daniel snapped a high jab toward Keanu's face. It was a fake, a feint meant to draw the guard up. As expected, Keanu's hands flashed up to protect his head. It was a reflex trained into him by years of boxing coaches yelling, "Protect your face." The moment Keanu's hands went high, Daniel saw the opening. It was the classic mistake. Defending the head leaves the body exposed. Daniel didn't hesitate. He torqued his hips and whipped a roundhouse kick toward Keanu's ribs. It wasn't a full power knockout kick, he wasn't trying to break any bones, but it was hard enough to leave a bruise, hard enough to knock the wind out of someone who wasn't conditioned. But Keanu didn't just stand there. At the exact moment Daniel's kick started to travel, Keanu's body did something unexpected. He didn't try to block the kick with his arm, which would have hurt like hell. Instead, he turned his body into the kick. He angled his ribs so that the impact glanced off him rather than hitting square. It was a technique called rolling with the punches, but applied to a kick. It was incredibly advanced. It required a level of relaxation and timing that most black belts struggled with. The slap of the shin guard against Keanu's torso echoed through the room, but it lacked the satisfying thud of solid contact. Keanu barely flinched. He absorbed the energy and immediately stepped forward, closing the distance before Daniel could set his foot back down on the ground. It was Daniel's turn to be surprised. He was momentarily off balance, hopping on one leg, while Keanu was moving into his space. This was dangerous territory for a kicker. Daniel instinctively tried to shove Keanu away to regain his distance, but Keanu was already there, framing Daniel's face with his hands, controlling his posture. It wasn't a strike, it was a grapple. They were chest to chest now. For a second, time seemed to stop. They were close enough that Daniel could see the drops of sweat beading on Keanu's forehead. He could see the intensity in the actor's eyes. There was no panic there. There was just a cold, calculating focus. Keanu wasn't trying to hit him, he was just holding him there, neutralizing the space. Daniel grunted and used his strength to push Keanu away, creating a gap between them again. They stepped back, circling each other once more. The test was getting real. Daniel's skepticism was turning into a genuine curiosity mixed with a growing competitive fire. He realized that Keanu wasn't reacting like an actor. He wasn't waiting for his cue to fall down. He was treating this like a puzzle that needed to be solved. "You're hard to hit," Daniel admitted, wiping his mouth with the back of his glove. A small compliment, but it carried weight. Keanu cracked a tired smile. "You're hitting hard enough. I'm just trying not to be there when it lands." "Smart," Daniel said. "But you can't run forever. Eventually, I'm going to catch you." "I know," Keanu replied. His voice was calm, eerily calm. "That's why I'm waiting." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Waiting for what?" "For the mistake." Daniel felt a chill go down his spine. That was a fighter's answer. Actors waited for their turn to speak. Fighters waited for their opponents to make a mistake. Daniel realized then that he had underestimated the man. He had assumed that because Keanu was a movie star, he was soft. He had forgotten that Keanu was also a man who had lived a hard life, a man who had trained in judo and jiu-jitsu for years, not just for a role, but for himself. But Daniel was the gatekeeper. He was the reality check. He couldn't let this end in a stalemate. He needed to escalate again. He needed to introduce the element of chaos that comes from real aggression. He decided it was time to attack the foundation. He wanted to see if Keanu could stand his ground when his legs were taken out from under him. He began to circle more aggressively, cutting off the ring. He was hurting Keanu, pushing him toward the corner of the mats where the crash pads were stacked. Keanu seemed to sense it too, glancing quickly at the padding behind him, then looking back at Daniel. He knew he was being cornered. Daniel feinted a left punch, then threw a heavy right cross. Keanu slipped the punch, but as he did, Daniel launched a low kick, aiming for the outside of Keanu's thigh. This was a debilitating strike in a real fight. It hurts the muscle so badly that you can't put weight on your leg. It's the great equalizer. The kick connected with a loud smack. Keanu's leg absorbed the blow, but this time, he didn't check it perfectly. It caught him just a bit off balance. He stumbled, taking a clumsy step to recover. Daniel saw the wobble. He saw the opening. This was it. This was the moment where the choreography usually broke down. In the movies, the stuntman would wait for the star to regain his balance. In real life, this was when you swarmed. Daniel didn't give him a second to breathe. He lunged forward, throwing a rapid combination jab, cross, hook. Keanu covered up, putting his gloves in front of his face, hunching his shoulders to protect himself. He was retreating, stumbling backward toward the padded wall. The crew held their breath. It looked like Daniel was overwhelming him. It looked like a TKO was coming. But Daniel was watching closely. He wasn't just throwing wild punches, he was setting a trap. He wanted to see if Keanu would panic. He wanted to see if he would turn his back or cover his eyes. Keanu didn't panic. Even while retreating, he was countering. Every time Daniel threw a punch, Keanu tapped it away with a small, precise movement. He was staying calm in the storm. But Daniel was pushing the pace so fast that Keanu was running out of room. Finally, Keanu's back touched the padded wall. He had nowhere to go. Daniel stopped, just for a split second, right in front of him. He didn't hit him. He just stood there, chest heaving, inches away. "You're trapped," Daniel said, his voice low and intense. "What do you do now? The stuntman isn't here to fall down. The director isn't here to yell cut. What do you do?" Keanu looked at him, his chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. He looked like a man who had just climbed a mountain. He didn't try to push off the wall. He didn't try to duck away. He looked Daniel right in the eye. "I make space," Keanu said. "Show me," Daniel challenged. Before the words were even fully out of Daniel's mouth, Keanu moved. He didn't try to run sideways. He didn't try to push Daniel with his hands. He did something completely unexpected. He stepped in. He stepped off the wall and directly into Daniel's personal space. It was a violation of the natural instinct to flee. It was so aggressive and so sudden that Daniel flinched backward, just for a microsecond. Keanu used that tiny bit of hesitation. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't throw a kick. He simply hooked one arm around Daniel's elbow and the other around Daniel's neck, executing a perfect clinch. He pulled Daniel into him, using Daniel's own weight against him, and pivoted his hips. Suddenly, Daniel wasn't the aggressor anymore. He was the one being controlled. Keanu spun him around, turning his back, and for a fleeting second, Daniel felt his balance leave him entirely. Daniel quickly reacted, using his wrestling experience to sprawl his hips back and prevent being thrown. He shoved Keanu away hard, and they separated, stumbling back to the center of the mat. They stood there, staring at each other across the distance. The room was dead silent. Not a single person was moving equipment or drinking coffee. Everyone was frozen, staring at the mat. Daniel was breathing hard now. He looked down at his gloves, then back at Keanu. That move, the clinch and the spin, that wasn't in the script. That wasn't standard choreography. That was high-level judo. That was something you learn by being thrown on your head 1,000 times. Daniel felt his respect for the actor solidify into something real. Keanu was good. He was really good. But the sparring session wasn't over yet. Daniel was a competitor, and the near takedown had pricked his ego. He had been surprised, and he didn't like being surprised. He needed to re-establish control. He needed to show that technique isn't everything. Sometimes, raw power and aggression win the day. He decided to stop playing the teacher role. It was time to end this. He was going to launch a committed attack, a combination that left no room for counters. He was going to push the pace so hard that Keanu's technique would break under the pressure. He was going to prove that in a real fight, the one move doesn't save you if the other guy is just stronger and meaner. Daniel adjusted his gloves one last time. He locked eyes with Keanu. He saw a glint of understanding there. Keanu knew Daniel was coming. He knew the playtime was over. "Ready?" Daniel asked. Keanu nodded. He didn't say a word. He just lowered his center of gravity, rooting himself into the mat like a tree. Daniel took a deep breath, filling his lungs. He visualized the attack. A fake low kick to distract, then a level change, dropping his height to shoot in for a double leg takedown. It was the most basic, most effective move in wrestling. If he got his hands on Keanu's legs, the spar was over. There would be no one move to save him. Just gravity and the mat. This was the test. The ultimate test of instinct versus training. Daniel's muscles coiled, ready to explode. He watched Keanu's feet, waiting for the weight shift. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the anticipation of the collision. And then, Daniel moved. He fired the fake kick, and as Keanu's eyes dropped, Daniel shot forward. He was faster than he had been all day. He was committed. He reached out with both hands to grab Keanu's knees, fully intending to dump him on his head. He was so focused on the legs, so focused on the takedown, that he didn't see the upper body coming. He didn't see the subtle shift in Keanu's shoulders that signaled a different kind of trap was being sprung. Daniel was driving forward with everything he had, certain he had won, but he was running blindly into the storm. The moment Daniel launched himself forward, time seemed to warp and stretch. He was fully committed to the takedown, diving low with his arms spread wide, aiming to wrap them around Keanu's legs like a boa constrictor. In his mind, he had already won. He had calculated the distance, the angle of the shot, and the speed needed to close the gap. He was the hunter, and the prey had nowhere to run. But as his fingers grazed the fabric of Keanu's GI pants, Daniel realized something was wrong. The resistance he expected wasn't there. Keanu didn't try to scramble backward. He didn't try to push Daniel's head away to stop the momentum. Instead, Keanu did the one thing Daniel hadn't prepared for. He leaned into the storm. Just as Daniel's chest was about to crash into Keanu's thighs, Keanu's hands moved with a blinding speed that contradicted his earlier, relaxed posture. They didn't go for Daniel's arms or his shoulders. They went for his head. Daniel felt two strong hands clamp onto the back of his skull and the collar of his shirt. It was a grip of iron, firm and controlling. Before Daniel could adjust his weight or change his trajectory, Keanu used Daniel's own forward drive against him. In a move that was pure jiu-jitsu genius, Keanu pulled Daniel's head down while simultaneously stepping his hip out. The physics of it were undeniable. Daniel was moving forward fast. When his head was jerked down and sideways, his body followed. His momentum, which was supposed to be a weapon, suddenly became a liability. He felt his feet leave the ground, but not in the way he wanted. He wasn't tackling Keanu, he was being thrown by him. It happened in a blur. There was a sensation of weightlessness, followed immediately by the dizzying spin of the world turning upside down. The bright overhead lights spun in a circle, and then thud. Daniel hit the mats with a heavy, jarring impact. He landed flat on his back, the air forcefully driven from his lungs in a loud, involuntary grunt. The sound of the impact echoed through the large room, silencing the hum of the ventilation and the whispers of the crew. It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of a clean, hard takedown. For a second, Daniel just stared up at the ceiling, his chest heaving, trying to force oxygen back into his system. His mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. He had been in thousands of sparring matches. He had been thrown before. But this felt different. It hadn't been a battle of brute strength where the stronger man won. This had been surgical. The one move, the pivot and the head control, had dismantled a perfect shot. It was a move that required incredible timing and a calmness under fire that Daniel possessed, but he didn't expect to find in the actor standing over him. Through the haze of his breathlessness, Daniel saw Keanu's face appear above him, blocking out the lights. Keanu wasn't panting. He wasn't smirking or celebrating, he just looked down, his expression one of focused concern. He didn't drop to the ground to hit Daniel with a ground and pound strike, nor did he try to lock in a submission hold. He simply held his position, his feet planted firmly in a stance of control, keeping Daniel pinned without hurting him. The room was absolutely dead silent. The stunt crew, the lighting technicians, even the director who had been watching from the sidelines, all of them were frozen. It was the silence of shock. They had seen the black belt versus actor dynamic play out in their heads, and they had expected the black belt to easily win, or at the very least, to control the spar. They hadn't expected the actor to dump the expert on the floor with a single, effortless maneuver. Keanu extended a hand down toward Daniel. "You good?" he asked, his voice calm. There was no arrogance in it, just a simple check-in. Daniel looked at the hand for a moment. He could feel the heat rising in his neck and cheeks, a mixture of exertion and a sharp, stinging humility. His ego was bruised far worse than his back. He had come in here to prove a point, to show the world that fighting on screen and fighting for real were two different things. Instead, he had been made an example of. Daniel reached up and gripped Keanu's forearm. Keanu pulled him up, not with a yank, but with a steady, smooth lift. As Daniel found his feet again, he stumbled slightly, still regaining his equilibrium. Keanu kept a hand on his shoulder to steady him, a gesture of sportsmanship that made Daniel feel even smaller. I didn't expect that, Daniel admitted, wiping the sweat from his eyes with the back of his glove. He was still trying to catch his breath. You baited me. Keanu let go of his shoulder and took a step back, lowering his hands. You were doing exactly what you were supposed to do, Keanu said, his tone respectful. Your shot was good. Fast. But I knew if I tried to fight your strength, you would have taken me down. I had to use the direction you were already going. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. It was a fundamental concept of martial arts the principle of yielding, and Keanu had just demonstrated it perfectly. Daniel realized that in his arrogance, he had been the one fighting with muscle and aggression, while Keanu had been fighting with intellect and technique. The roles had completely reversed. The movie star had been the martial artist, and the martial artist had been the brawler. You set me up, Daniel said, a small, involuntary smile touching his lips. When I hit the gloves, you made me think I was breaking through. You wanted me to shoot. Keanu shrugged, a modest gesture. I just wanted to see what you had. If I didn't invite you in, I was just going to be running backward all day. That's a good way to lose. Daniel looked around the room. The silence was starting to break as people went back to work, but the energy had completely shifted. The skeptical glances were gone. Now, the crew was looking at Keanu with a different kind of reverence. It wasn't just because he was a famous actor, it was because he had just walked the walk. Daniel looked at Keanu, really seeing him now. He saw the bruises on the actor's arms, the slight swelling on his knuckles, the way he carried his weight. This wasn't a man who played a fighter on the weekends. This was a man who treated the art with the seriousness it deserved. You've been training, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. I try, Keanu replied. It helps with the clarity. Just being on the mat, solving problems, it grounds you. It keeps you honest. Daniel felt a wave of respect wash over him. He had judged the book by the cover, assuming the glitter of Hollywood covered a hollow inside. He had been wrong. He had tested the man, and the man had passed with flying colors. But more than that, Keanu had taught Daniel a lesson about his own pride. Daniel had wanted to humiliate the actor to prove a point about reality. Instead, the reality had humiliated him. Daniel reached out and tapped Keanu on the shoulder, a gesture of gratitude. Well, Daniel said, his voice louder now, addressing the small group of people who were still pretending not to listen. I stand corrected. That was a beautiful counter. Textbook. Keanu smiled, a genuine, humble expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Thanks, Daniel. I appreciate you pushing me. I needed to know if that stuff actually works when someone is really coming at me. It works, Daniel laughed, shaking his head. Trust me, it works. The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a lighter, more energetic vibe. The test was over. The sparring session had concluded with a definitive result. There were no arguments, no disputes. The mats didn't lie. As they walked to the edge of the mat to take off their gloves, Daniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't expected. He had come in with a chip on his shoulder, carrying the weight of his own rigid traditionalism. He had left that weight on the floor when Keanu threw him. He realized that there wasn't just one way to be a martial artist. You didn't have to be a grizzled gym rat who hated the movies to be real. You could be a person who absorbed knowledge, stayed humble, and used art as a way to express the truth. The director walked over, clapping his hands. "Okay, that looked intense. Keanu, you good? We need you for the wide shot in 5. "Good to go," Keanu said, peeling off his gloves and handing them to a production assistant. He looked back at Daniel one last time. "We can roll again later if you want. I still have a lot to learn on the ground." Daniel laughed, a hearty, genuine sound. "I think I've learned enough for today," he said. "But yet, I'd like that. Next time, I won't fall for the head control." "We'll see," Keanu said with a wink. "We'll see." As Keanu walked back toward the lights to resume his role as the unstoppable John Wick, Daniel watched him go. He didn't see a movie star anymore. He saw a fellow student of the arts. The one move had changed everything, not because it was a magical technique, but because it shattered the illusion of separation. It proved that dedication knows no profession. Whether you are a black belt consultant or a Hollywood icon, the mat is the great equalizer. And on that day, under the bright lights, the student had become the master, if only for a moment. Daniel picked up his water bottle and took a long drink, the cool water soothing his dry throat. He felt lighter, the cynicism that had plagued him for weeks finally gone. He watched Keanu get into position, resetting for the camera. The actor moved with a different kind of confidence now, a quiet assurance that comes from surviving the fire. Daniel nodded to himself, turned, and walked back to his spot against the wall, ready to watch the rest of the filming with a new set of eyes that finally understood the truth. The dust seemed to settle slowly in the rafters of the studio, even though the air conditioning was humming steadily. Daniel stood by the water cooler, his back pressed against the cold metal, staring across the vast room at the man who had just turned his entire worldview upside down. The adrenaline from the sparring session was still pumping through his veins, making his hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of what had just happened. He took a long sip of water, feeling the cold liquid calm his racing heart. Around him, the crew was moving again, but the vibe was different. Before, there had been an underlying current of skepticism, a feeling that the tough guy on screen was just a product of editing and camera angles. Now, the crew moved with a renewed sense of respect. They had seen the physics. They had seen the impact. They knew that the star of the movie wasn't just pretending, he was living it. Daniel watched Keanu on the set. The actor was back in position, resetting for the next camera angle. He didn't look like a man who had just won a confrontation, he looked like a man who was getting ready to go to work. He was checking his gloves, talking quietly with the stunt coordinator, pointing out a mark on the floor where he needed to land. There was no chest thumping. No bragging. No looking around the room to see if everyone was impressed. It was as if the throw hadn't even happened, or rather, as if it was just a normal part of a Tuesday afternoon. This, Daniel realized, was the mark of a true master. Amateurs brag about their victories, professionals just move on to the next task. Daniel felt a wave of humility wash over him. He had come onto that set with a chip on his shoulder, thinking he was the gatekeeper of real fighting. He had judged Keanu by the movies he made, assuming that glitz and glamour equated to a lack of substance. He had been wrong, and the realization was a heavy, but necessary pill to swallow. The director called for action, and the room snapped back into high gear. The scene they were filming was a complex hallway fight involving 3 attackers. Daniel watched with a critical eye, but now, his criticism was gone. He saw the details he had missed before. He noticed the way Keanu positioned his feet before a strike, ensuring he was never off balance. He saw how Keanu's eyes didn't just look at the person he was hitting, he was scanning the periphery, aware of the other stuntmen waiting to jump in. It wasn't choreography anymore, it was tactical awareness. Over the next few hours, Daniel became a different kind of consultant. Instead of standing on the sidelines with crossed arms, waiting to correct a mistake, he found himself leaning in, listening to Keanu's ideas. Between takes, Keanu would come over to the monitors to review the footage. "What do you think about that last transition?" Keanu asked, pointing at the screen where he was disarming a knife-wielding attacker. "It feels a little slow. Like I'm waiting for him." Daniel looked at the screen, then at Keanu. "It's not the speed of your hands," Daniel said, his voice carrying a new weight of respect. "It's your hips. You're turning too late. If you turn your hips before you grab the wrist, you generate the power to rip it out of his hand. It makes the disarm happen instantly." Keanu nodded, absorbing the information instantly. "Turn the hips first. Got it? Let's try it." They ran the take again. This time, Keanu moved with explosive power, his body rotating violently, ripping the foam knife from the stuntman's grip with such force that the stuntman actually stumbled. The director yelled, "Cut! That was amazing. Print it." Keanu walked off the mat, wiping his face, and gave Daniel a thumbs up. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Daniel. They were communicating as equals now. They were speaking the same language. The barrier between the Hollywood star and the martial arts expert had dissolved completely. As the day wore on, the sun began to set outside the high windows of the studio. The long shadows stretched across the blue mats. The fatigue was setting in for everyone. The crew was tired, the stunt team was bruised and battered, and even Keanu was showing signs of exhaustion, moving a little slower between takes. During a longer break while the lighting crew changed a massive overhead rig, Daniel found himself sitting on an equipment crate next to Keanu. They were both drinking water, just enjoying the silence. "You know," Daniel said, breaking the quiet. "I've been doing this for a long time. I've trained professional fighters, military guys, police officers. I walk into a room, and I usually size everyone up in 10 seconds. I can tell who knows what they're doing and who is faking it." Keanu looked at him, his eyes tired but attentive. He waited for Daniel to continue. "When I looked at you this morning," Daniel admitted, "I put you in the actor box. I thought you were a talented guy who was good at memorizing moves. I was ready to prove that point. I was arrogant." Keanu smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "It's okay, Daniel. You're protective of the art. I respect that. There are a lot of people out there who claim to be things they aren't. I get why you wanted to test me." Daniel shook his head. "It wasn't just a test. I wanted to expose you. And then, one move changed everything. You didn't just beat me, you taught me. You used my own energy against me. That's not something you learn in a weekend seminar." "I have great teachers," Keanu said simply. And I love it. I love the history of it. I love the discipline. But mostly, I love the challenge. You never know it all. Every time I step on the mat, I'm a white belt again. I'm learning. That mindset, Daniel said, pointing his water bottle at Keanu, that is why you won today. It wasn't the judo throw. It was the fact that you weren't afraid to lose. I was so focused on winning, on proving I was the real fighter, that I left myself open. I was fighting for my ego. You were fighting for the art. Keanu nodded, looking down at his hands. Ego makes you heavy. It slows you down. If you're worried about looking cool or winning, you can't see what's actually happening. You saw the opening for the takedown, but you didn't see the trap because you wanted the takedown too badly. Daniel sat back, stunned by the simplicity and depth of the statement. It was a lesson he had heard 1,000 times in the dojo, but hearing it from the man he had underestimated made it click in a new way. The one move was more than a physical technique, it was a philosophical victory. It was the triumph of presence over arrogance. Well, Daniel said, standing up and stretching his stiff back. I won't make that mistake again. Next time we spar, I'm coming at you with a clear head. Keanu laughed, standing up as well. I look forward to it. But remember, even if you have a clear head, I'm still going to try to throw you. I wouldn't have it any other way, Daniel replied. The break was over, and the crew swarmed back onto the set. The final sequence of the night was the most difficult one. It required Keanu to fight while injured, limping, showing the vulnerability of the character. It was an emotional scene, not just a physical one. As Daniel watched Keanu perform, he saw a transformation. The actor wasn't just acting tough, he was channeling the exhaustion of the day, the sweat, the pain, and the reality of the fight into his performance. The struggle looked real because, in a way, it was. Keanu had been tested physically and mentally that day. He had faced a skeptic and proven him wrong without saying a harsh word. That confidence bled into the character on the screen. The character on the screen wasn't a superhero, he was a survivor, a man who kept going even when he was tired and hurt. When the director finally yelled, "That's a wrap for the day," a collective sigh of relief went through the room. The mood instantly lightened. People started packing up gear, laughing and joking about the long day. Keanu stayed behind, helping the stunt team clean up the pads. He didn't rush to his trailer. He picked up discarded water bottles and stacked them neatly. He shook hands with every single crew member, thanking them for their hard work. Daniel watched from a distance, observing the interactions. He saw Keanu talking to the young intern who had been running around all day fetching coffee. Keanu listened to the kid tell a story, laughing genuinely, and patting him on the back. It was clear that the humility Keanu showed on the mat was the same humility he carried in his daily life. He wasn't just a martial artist, he was a good human being. Daniel gathered his own bag, throwing his towel and gear inside. He felt lighter than he had in years. The cynicism that had been clouding his judgment was gone. He realized that he had been protecting the art of fighting from people he thought were unworthy, but the art is big enough for everyone. It belongs to the veteran with black belts and scars, and it belongs to the actor who dedicates himself to learning it with an open heart. As he walked toward the exit, he passed Keanu one last time. "Great work today, Keanu," Daniel said. Keanu looked up, surprised to see Daniel still there. He smiled that familiar, crooked smile. "Thanks, Daniel. Thank you for the lesson on the hips. It really helped. And thank you for the lesson on perspective, Daniel replied. They shook hands. It was a firm, strong grip. A handshake between warriors. Daniel walked out of the studio and into the cool night air of New York City. The streets were bustling with traffic, taxis honking, and people rushing to get home. The city was loud and chaotic, a stark contrast to the focused, quiet intensity of the gym. He took a deep breath, smelling the exhaust fumes and the street food aromas. He felt alive. He felt excited to go back to his own school and teach his students with a fresh approach. He would tell them the story of the one move, not to brag about meeting a movie star, but to teach them the lesson he had learned. He would tell them that true mastery isn't about how hard you can hit, or how many titles you have. It's about how open your mind is. It's about having the courage to step into the unknown and the humility to accept the truth, even when it surprises you. The one move had changed everything, indeed. It hadn't just been a throw on a mat. It had been a throw that knocked down the walls of prejudice and ego, clearing the way for genuine respect and growth. And as Daniel hailed a taxi to head home, he knew that this was a day he would remember for the rest of his life, the day the black belt challenged the actor, and the black belt became the student.